And when the empires rise and fall, demand supply is affected. When demand supply is, if there's less demand, what happens is that the logistics suffer, people don't get paid, and therefore the industry upstream collapses. And perhaps Harappa survived by being a major supplier to Mesopotamia, and therefore when demand went down, the cities of Harappa could not be sustained. The wealth came down, and therefore control came down. When control came down, and we know this because about 100 years before Harappan cities come to an end, the unicorn seals, which seem to be found in every city and seem to be somehow related to the bureaucracy, starts to disappear.
That's very true that Indus civilization is a vast topic, and there are so many elements of urbanization to understand from it. But I think you've covered it so well for the students, so at least they will have this thing in mind that what are important pointers क्या हैं जो उनको हमेशा दिमाग में रखने हैं about the Indus civilization and the urbanization related to it. Now, having covered Indus civilization, let's also talk about the phase of Mahajanpadas and Janpadas. And please take us to the phase of, the Janpads and Mahajanpads, and which were a kind of drivers for the urbanization in India. Your take on it?
Janapada, Mahajanapada. So the Harappan civilization came to an end in 1900 BCE. That is about 4,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, we know that something has changed in India. So the cities have come to an end. People have forgotten maybe about the cities. There are some of their descendants there. But we find, as per genetic studies, the genes of India have changed dramatically. A new gene has entered India. It is, we call it the Aryan gene, because it seems to be the people who come from the steppe Eurasian regions, that is somewhere in southern Russia. From southern Russia, people travel to the Ural mountains and the Ural river basin. From there, they come to the Oxus River Basin, which is Central Asia, Uzbekistan, and they come from southern Russia via Kazakhstan. You have to look at the map to understand this. So from the Ukraine and southern Russia, they travel through Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, they come to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. They live here around 4,000 years ago, and about 3,500 years ago, they start entering India, probably through the Bolan Pass and later through the Khyber Pass. They bring horses with them. These are the Aryan people. The word Aryan is used for the Indo-European people who traveled eastward. So those who came to India and to Iran, that's it. No other place is called, the Aryan word is not used for European Indo-Europeans. We are only talking to the eastern side, that is Iran and India. But the Aryans come around 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. We're not 100% how long. It's a trickle. Small groups of immigrants come in, mostly men. Y chromosome. We don't see a shift in the M chromosome. Chromosomes in our cell, there are, mitochondrial chromosomes, and the Y chromosome comes from the man, which is the father, and the mitochondrial chromosome or the M chromosome comes from the mother. There is no change in mitochondrial DNA, which means the women are the local women, but the Y chromosome has changed, indicating people have come from another place. They've usually, as we know, they've come from the northwest part of India, and they slowly sort of intermarry. The local women produce the children. Their children compose the Vedas. All information about them comes from the Vedas. Vedas is the oldest poetry in the world that has information about horse riding, horse chariots, and also sacrifice of horses, because horses were first used as food, then they were domesticated and controlled and used to pull chariots, and a few horses were used to be ridden. It's much later, that is around 500 BCE, that chariots became abandoned. They became status symbols, and cavalry became important because the horses grew in size. I mean, this is a little bit of background information where before we start about the second urbanization, which starts 2,500 years ago in the Gangetic Plain. And this is when I'm using the word Gangetic, I'm using really a very vast idea. We are starting all the way from Afghanistan, northern Pakistan, all the way south to Bihar. This is called Uttarapatha. This land, the Ganga Yamuna area, is called Madhya Desha. And then there is a Dakshana Patha, which is really the rivers. The Ganga river is obviously rain fed, but it also receives tributaries from the Vindhya mountains, like the Son river, the Betwa river, the Chambal river. And this part is where Gwalior is located, Ujjain is located, currently Bhopal and Indore are located. These places play a very important role. This is also part of the Mahajanapada space. The Aravalli Mountains is also important, therefore Jaipur is important, Gujarat is important. And then Vindhya mountains forms a big divide, very difficult to cross these mountains and the river Narmada, but there's a gap in between from where people would cross it, and therefore you have some cities on the southern side of Vindhyas and in Maharashtra, and then down the Godavari and Krishna river to the coast of the eastern coast of India, which is Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. So this is the region we are talking about 2,500 years ago. Again, like Harappa, these are mercantile cities, not kings, but cities built by merchants. And it's an important point to remember, because when we talk of cities and civilization, we are obsessed with kings. And one big mistake we make is we are looking for kings in Harappa, we are looking for kings in Mahajanapadas, but really these are mercantile cities. The cities have emerged because of economic reasons. Farmers, herdsmen start producing goods like pottery, and the pottery and then jewelry and then fabric, and they come to cities to trade. Gradually cities become the center of trade. This is manufacturing units established, logistical units, the merchants live in the city, craftsmen live in the city, and different kinds of craftsmen, different kinds of merchants live in the city. Some bring raw materials, some bring finished goods, some take away finished goods, some take away raw materials. All that is happening in these cities in order to regulate these cities, to prevent conflict, war, because there are people from all over coming. You suddenly need a power structure, and this is how kings come into being. And we have the stories from the Buddhist literature that kings were created to prevent conflicts between people. Similar stories, this is the origin of stories. Our information about these cities, the Mahajanapadas, their political structure, the economic structure, really comes from Buddhist literature, the Jataka tales and the Nikaya texts. So the old Buddhist literature informs us about this period, and the images of this period that we have, this is the first time we have archaeological evidence of cities, also come from Buddhist sites. This is the place, the archaeological evidence would be these Buddhist stupas with railings built by successful merchants who are praying to the Buddha, and these railings have images of these grand cities with towers and walls and moats. Obviously the cities were important to protect people, protect the wealth of the merchants, protect the artisans, and these stories of war happening between the Mahajanapadas. So it's a rich period. 2,500 years ago, economic activity is booming, and along with that, as money grows, another group of people come that money is the cause of suffering, desire is the cause of suffering. So Buddhism and Jainism is rising exactly when the economic boom is happening, and the economic boom is also indicated by the presence of currency. India is amongst the first countries in the world, along with Greece and China, to introduce metal currency, which serves as a common denominator that enables trade. So when you go to the market, it becomes easier to trade because you have got a coin, and every good in the market can be evaluated as a multiple of this coin. Now, who built these coins? Today, when we talk about Indian rupee, it is made by the government of India through the Reserve Bank of India. So there's a political force involved. But the old Mahajanapada coins, which have these punched mark coins with symbols like the sun and the moon and the plow, these are located on these copper coins, silver coins. These were made by merchant guilds, and they were used between merchants. There was no king really involved. We do know certain kings existed, like Brahmadatta, who appears in a lot of Jataka tales, and of course we have heard of Buddha being a king, although that has been disputed nowadays. He obviously was from a very rich, affluent, aristocratic, probably a farming family, not perhaps a king, but these are disputed areas. But we know that merchants played a very important role in these stories, and people used to worship gods known as yakshas, associated, who were pot-bellied, carried by people, in palkis, and they were very rich. They had treasures with them. So these rich, there are images in Mathura which show these tall, broad, rather large men and women wearing lots of jewelry, wearing very fine cotton robes. indicating the level of wealth we are talking about. Now the Mahajanapadas, traditionally there are 16 Mahajanapadas, and the good way to remember this is to see the different parts of India. Of course, the list changes across different texts, and there's no standard list, but broadly you can remember things like Gandhara is located in Afghanistan, Kekeya and Madra is located in Pakistan, Sindh is another place, so that is the northwest part. Then as you come towards India, as you move towards India, Delhi becomes important. Delhi was Hastinapur. North of Delhi was Kurukshetra. Further north was Trigarta. Towards the south, towards Jaipur, was Matsya Desha. Then you move towards Ayodhya, you have got Koshala. Then you have got Kashi, which is Banaras. Allahabad is Vajja. Then you have got Kanpur, Kamboja. So you have got another place there, Kanpur. Then you have got Bihar, very rich and fertile region. So here you have got many countries like Ang, Magadha. These are located in Bihar. Vajji. Vats is located in the Gangetic plain. Then when you come towards Madhya Pradesh, you have Avanti, Ujjain, Mahishmati. These are the names that emerge in Ujjain. Then south of the Narmada, south of the Vindhyas, you have the Asmaka, you have Kalinga in Odisha, you have Andhra in Andhra Pradesh. So really the Deccan region starts to be occupied. These are some of the Mahajanapadas. The kings at this time really are collecting their money through toll tax. So toll becomes important because if that merchants are traveling, they need security, and the king gives them security, in exchange asks for a toll. He manages the highways. So the kings really are controlling highways, and therefore the big symbol of kingship at that time is a wheel with spoked wheel. Spoked wheel is basically referring to the wheel of the merchant caravans. It refers to the chariot of the king. It also refers to the central capital, the Mahajanapada, and the highways are the spokes, and the periphery of the wheel represents how far the king has a control. Chakravarti as a concept, the great king who controls many cities. He has got a hub and spoke model, we can say. Now Jana means people. Janapada is where they put their feet. So Janapada is a settlement where people stay together. Mahajanapada is where many people stay together, which means it's not just a simple gram or a village, but it's a nagara where many, or a puri or a pura, where people stay together, multiple people stay. You know, these words transform over time. In the Vedic time, the word grama just means a set of caravans which have stopped in a circular formation. That is what the word grama meant. Once agriculture became important, then the village, the fields, the houses living together, and maybe having a common administrative unit like a panchayat, which manages the disputes in the village, issues related to property, border disputes, marriage, inheritance, brothers fighting over property, all that needed to be managed. So you had these Janapadas, and then gradually as markets emerged, as larger cities emerged, and Mahajanapadas, and then you had the kings, the Raja, who prevented Arajakta. See the word Raja, who prevent Arajakta. What is Arajakta? When people don't respect the law and do not respect your property, that this is mine and that is yours. And to prevent these disputes, Rajas emerged primarily to assure law and order and to prevent people from fighting. That is how kings came into being. In exchange for this, they were allowed to use violence to create law and order, and they were allowed to collect taxes for their upkeep. That is how taxes came into being. So tolls came into being. As I said, toll tax, really agricultural tax is not a big deal in the Mahajanapada period, and that comes much later. In the post-Gupta period is when agricultural tax becomes more important and toll tax loses its importance, which means the market economy collapses and the agriculture rises. And that when this shift happens, you have the Mahajanapada period coming to an end. The market forces go down, and the agricultural forces, market forces don't disappear, but they become less important, and the agricultural wealth becomes more important. And that is the time when markets don't become so important. Merchants lose their status. Buddhism and Jainism stops being important. And that is roughly in the 3rd, 4th century, around as the Gupta period is rising. One of the reasons for the collapse of the second urban cities is the end of the Roman Empire, which was a major importer of Indian luxury goods, in exchange for which India would collect gold. Little detail, where did gold come from in India, as people can ask? One of the major centers of gold was Odisha. That is why you have rivers like Mahanadi and Suvarna Rekha, from where gold was collected by panning. Another place where gold came was Southeast Asia, which is why Southeast Asia was called Suvarna Bhumi. Yeah, so this is how you know the second urbanization of India in the Gangetic regions.
That's a very interesting aspect of gold which you have talked about in this particular answer, and I think students can get an extra edge while writing about it in their exams. Also, from the prelims perspective, remember these things, because sometimes questions are unexpectedly not very textbook based. So you should, while listening to all these lectures, you should keep it in mind that, art and culture mein ye padha tha, ye suna tha. So maybe you can get an edge over others in your examination. Also, that brings me to a very important point. We are talking about a lot of places, geography, a lot of locations. So whenever you're listening to this lecture, or whenever you're studying in general, keep the atlas, the world map, the India map in front of you, so that you can locate the places of historical, archaeological importance. And I'm sure that will remain in your mind when you revise it, when you listen to this episode again. So have those, tools with you when you are watching this episode or watching this lectures. So now let's move to another question. And the other question which comes to our mind is about the material evidences, the pottery, the archaeological artifacts. This is something, these are the sources to understand Indian history, Indian art and culture, and urbanization, if we talk about. So can you tell us, throw some light on this material culture of or archaeological evidences, artifacts, which talks about urbanization?
It is important to understand the material manifestations of culture and cities. When we talk of Harappa, we really talk of the bricks, the standardized bricks, 1 by 2 by 3, which is found across this region, and the use of they were not sun-baked, but they were baked in the kiln, and that is an important point to remember. So they were solid bricks built in this period, Harappa. But Dholavira as a city used stone, because stone was easily available. So not all Harappan cities were made of brick. Dholavira, which is located in the Gulf of Kutch, use stone. Now, after the Harappan period, what happens? Do we find any archaeological sites? We really do not find archaeological sites till the Mahajanapada period, when we start finding these coins. The coins, the kashapanas, which are found in the Gangetic plain. And that becomes important. That's a big archaeological evidence. And we then start finding statues. Statues like the stupas, the images of Buddha, the images of yakshas in Mathura. We find images in Andhra, Amravati. We find these stupas and railings and images of men and women bejeweled and cities. These are the architects which emerged 2,500 years ago. So we have the brick cities of 4,500 years ago, and suddenly we have these religious art of yakshas, Buddha, and these cities with beautifully bejeweled men and women appearing around in the railings of the Buddhist stupa, and of course currencies about 2,500 years ago. Really, there's a gap about 1,000 to 2,000 years between the Harappa and the Mahajanapadas, where we wonder, where are the cities, what are the artifacts? And the only artifacts we have really are pots. Of course, there are some metal items like weapons, but really it's pots which made it important. And we remember 3 pots. Harappan period, you had red and black pots. And this is consistent. From Harappa, we find them later even in the southern part of India. But in when what is called the Aryan period, between 1500 and about 500 BCE, we suddenly find painted grey ware. So from red you move to grey pottery, and that is the period which is called the Vedic period, is associated, and the Vedic region, which is in the Gangetic Plains, is associated with this grey pottery. And when the Vedic period sort of draws to a close and the Buddhism and Jainism start to rise and the Mahajanapada cities rise, we have this polished black pottery. So red becomes grey, becomes black, and that is how you remember. So the Harappan period has red pottery, the Vedic period has grey pottery, and the Mahajanapada period, when the Buddhism and Jainism is flourishing, you have got the polished black pottery, after which you suddenly find the red ware appearing usually in the southern part of India. It's important to remember this little detail about potteries when we are talking about cities. Archaeology is as important as textual evidence.
That's an important point of pottery which you mentioned, Devdutt, क्योंकि students को ये जानना जरूरी है कि एक pottery type tells us about that particular culture, and ये एक लिस्ट बना लेनी चाहिए स्टूडेंट्स को जहाँ पे कौन सा कल्चर कौन से पॉटरी टाइप से एसोसिएटेड है, बिकॉज दिस कैन बी अ वेरी प्रोबेबल क्वेश्चन एंड अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल रिमेन कंफ्यूज्ड अबाउट इट. एक चीज तो ये, एंड द सेकंड थिंग इज व्हेन देवदत्त यू टॉक अबाउट आर्कियोलॉजी एंड टेक्सचुअल सोर्सेज, हिस्ट्री. बहुत पहले एक लोग सोचते थे, कहते थे कि आर्कियोलॉजी इज जस्ट हैंड्स मेडन ऑफ हिस्ट्री. Okay, a lot of people do not agree with it because they think that archaeology and textual sources or history go hand in hand. तो एक important aspect है जो students को जानना चाहिए कि archaeology, material sources are equally important as textual sources, especially for the time period जहाँ पे literary sources, textual sources available नहीं है या उनको पढ़ा नहीं जा सका है. Okay, like the Indus Civilization. So keep that in mind. Both textual and archaeological sources become very important to understand culture and history in general. Now let's come to our last question for today's episode, which is connecting the past to the present, to the contemporary. This is a very important question because UPSC have been trying to ask such questions. For example, if we compare the past with present, to what extent this urban planning, this civilization, we talk about Indus Valley Civilization, Janpads, Mahajanpad phase, how do we see the connection in the present day context from the perspective of urban planning and urbanization?
In the, we have to always ask when we're studying these Harappan cultures, Mahajanapadas, and generally urbanization, how does it, is there a connection with urban planning and current contemporary issues? Now, first thing we know that Indian cities, many of the cities in India, when we say the old cities, they seem to be more planned, and the newer cities seem to be less planned. But then there is an effort to build plannings. For example, Bombay has New Bombay, which was planned. Chandigarh city is planned. Bhubaneswar is planned by La Corbusier, and these are grid-like cities. But somehow they don't satisfy the needs of India. In India, the cities, we realize, unlike the highly tightly regulated Harappan cities, Indian cities are very difficult to tightly regulate, and the absence of regulation is seen in our country. We also realize that the way water supply, sanitation, sewage facilities were there in the Harappan cities is not found today. The level of standardization which existed in Harappa in terms of weight measures, language, and in the design of the bricks, which were 1 by 2 by 3 size, that kind of and even the wells had these trapezoid shaped standardized bricks. We don't find so much in India. The standardization is with reference to money, of course. We have a standardized currency, but in terms of cities, the planning, the width of the road, the sewage systems, there doesn't seem to be any standardization. We know the cities like Gurgaon do not have great sanitary facilities. Every year cities are being flooded, and it is said that even when floods come today, the Harappan cities were built at a height where they do not get affected by the rains, which means people there had planned even that in those days. They have water management systems there to prevent flooding, which don't exist even today. So that's an important point to remember when we talk of the, how have we learned anything from the past? The kind of, even today we are talking about Swachh Bharat, we are talking about toilets, we're talking about absence of toilets, open defecation in the 21st century, which was, there were perhaps toilets and drains very clearly, and people didn't have to go out to do the ablutions in many Harappan cities. And this kind of thing is something to be considered. As far as the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas are concerned, we know that we don't don't think they were very regulated cities, but clearly they were walled cities. They had moats, they had security, they had kings, they had armies. The kings fought with each other. Security was important, and therefore we realized the importance of, from them we learned the importance of the police force, law and order, the importance of kings, the importance of leaders, civic administration, and most importantly, toll tax, octroi tax. There's octroi when you enter a city, you have to pay a tax, you have to pay a sales tax, indirect taxation. These taxation ideas really we learn from Mahajanapadas. Kings made their money through tolls. They provided a service of law and order. Today we do pay octroi services, but we wonder whether the taxes collected are giving us the services that we need. We realize both from the Mahajanapadas as well as from Harappa the importance of market economy. Both of them really don't talk of an agricultural economy. They really talk of market economy and international trade. These are points to ponder about when we talk about the old urbanizations.
All right, then. Thank you so much. And with this last question, I am also reminded of the aspect of continuity and change. So, in any topic which you are dealing with, students should try to see what has continued and what has changed. Okay, it's a good point to write in a conclusion. In fact, when you're talking about art and culture and history, and you can see it from the present day context, कि क्या बदला है, क्या नहीं बदला है. So that is an important aspect, and there are a lot of points to ponder from this episode, as Devdutt has also mentioned. But there is one point to ponder, which is going to lead us to our next episode. So Devdutt, if you may give a point to ponder for our students for our next episode.
So I want to leave you with a point to ponder till the next episode, right? Harappan cities, when we talked about Harappan civilization or IVC, we're really talking about the northwest part of India. When we are talking about Mahajanapadas, we are talking about the northeast part of India, the Gangetic plains stretching from Gandhara all the way to Magad. And a little bit of Kalinga and Andhra Pradesh. But what about the southern part of India? The third urbanization based on temples, cities like Chidambaram, Tanjore, Madurai. We have to talk about these temples. I want you to think about how temples play a key role in establishing cities. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Devdutt. So that was your point to ponder. Students have to think about it before coming to the next episode. If you haven't watched our previous episodes, do watch them to get better understanding of certain concepts from the perspective of art and culture. But not just that, you have to link it to what is happening in the contemporary times, to history, to geography, to society, to governance, and understand it in a wholesome way so that you can reproduce it in your answers, not just limited to art and culture, but when you're talking about society, when you're talking about writing in an essay. And that is the purpose of having an expert like Devdutt Pattanaik on our panel to discuss, to take up your topics and your questions. That's all for today, and hoping to meet you for the next episode. Do revise the previous lectures and subscribe to the Indian Express, the YouTube channel, gets many videos like this. Attend the live session, which is on Wednesday, 8 p.m., where I take up your queries and we talk about UPSC in general and news in particular. That's all from me today. Think smart, work hard, conquer your goal.